panelists have been introduced. My name is Abdullahi, and when you do such a panel, one of the prayers that you always hope for as a moderator is to have panel that is self-sustaining. And Alhamdulillah, I'm glad to be having, I don't need to introduce them. All of them are people who are capable in their respective field. The only thing that I will be asking from the audience is, I don't want this to be kama shule, where they will be saying, in those primary schools in rural areas where what they say is everything. I want to also encourage participation, so be ready with your questions. I'm sure most of you have been thinking about these issues, but also as they are talking, it will be useful for us to be able to have a very engaging, a very fruitful discussion. Diversity, I was given as a moderator a fair degree of leverage to take the discussion in a way that would bring the best out of the audience. So I would want to start with my good friend, my colleague Rashid. A lot of the time when we speak about Somalis, we sometimes lose sight of this big, diverse community that in the Horn, I think no other communities occupy 5 countries except the Somalis. In some of these countries, they are also a minority. In some of these countries, they are a majority. I wanted you to provide us with that brief, broad stroke explanation of where the Somalis sit within the Horn, and then we'll pick it from then and just narrow it down to, some of the issues that I want to come out to ensure that we lead the discussion in the direction of diversity and inclusivity.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. First of all, let me thank the organizers of this fantastic event. I think celebrating culture is a worthwhile venture, and I will encourage the Somali nation to continue, I think, celebrating its culture. Not only because culture is important, but also because there are enemies of culture within the Somali community. Everyone knows the powerful Islamist movement in Somalia and their hatred for culture. And so this is just an aside. I think going back to the question, the Somali nation is basically scattered in 5 territories or 5 nations: Ethiopia, Kenya, Somaliland, Djibouti, and also southern Somalia. So this is not a choice which the Somali nation made. It was a colonial fiat. However, I think the reality is that Somalis are at peace wherever they are, and they have learned to live in the nations where they live. They have negotiated, sometimes very painfully, a form of existence that actually, in many ways, has come to strengthen, I think, their resolve as well as their determination to continue to exist as a people who matter. And so the experience of the Somalis in Kenya, which I'm more familiar with, is quite interesting. When I was growing up as a young boy in northern Kenya, I never felt a chip in my shoulder, frankly. I knew the state conducted itself sometimes in a very authoritarian way. I knew there were crackdowns and terrible things happened in the north. But I think despite that, I am proud to say today that Somalis have found a place in Kenya, much more better than I think elsewhere in the region. That said, I think we are still a long way from becoming what we ought to become, which is the mainstream part of this country, with a say, with a voice, and also, as the theme of this week clearly states, our search for inclusion is part of that wider diversity, part of that wider Kenyan fabric. And I think if we can find an accommodation there, that will be the day I think Somalis will be happy with themselves and will be also at ease with themselves as well.
Thank you, Rashid. Nanjala, a lot of the time we speak about imagination. In some of my discussions, I generally say Kenyans, the language, or probably a national therapy in this country is largely about nostalgia, because it's very good, it was amazing. We hardly want to interrogate the reality, the contemporary reality, because it's painful. And part of it is coping mechanism, part of it is us not wanting to wrestle with our reality. What role does imagination plays in ensuring, diversity and inclusivity?
So a nice, easy question to start with. Okay. I think imagination, and especially our capacity to imagine a different future, is an important way of building inclusivity and diversity, because the average person has no interest in, violence, military expansion, and all of those things. The average person wants to wake up in the morning in peace, do their job, go home, provide for their family, etc., etc. But in the process of doing that, we often encounter all kinds of obstacles, whether it's, failing public services, whether it's, your country's at war with another country, you weren't asked, you weren't consulted, you weren't involved, you're just told suddenly you're at war, and that changes how you travel, it changes how you, what food is available. I was watching in Qatar now with the Gulf crisis. You wake up one morning and there's nothing on the shelf, and you're just an ordinary person, you didn't want any of that. I think the capacity to imagine a different future for ourselves, and especially for our children, is what allows us to start a program of action whereby citizens become more involved and more engaged in their societies, and become more involved and engaged in building a better future. And I think especially in Kenya, where we have so much diversity and we have so many different communities, creating space for people to cultivate their imagination is a starting point for us to start to write a national narrative, which is something that we've kind of struggled with in the last 52, 53 years. We have had a version that was imposed by the state, and we said, that doesn't sound right. And now there's kind of a vacuum, because we don't have an authoritarian state that tells us you are Kenyan because of X, Y, Z. So we need to imagine that for ourselves. And I think a starting point is to start having conversations like this. Start talking to people who have a different background from yours, who are coming from a different life experience from yours, and start to imagine a united future together.
I just want to segue that and bring Madam Professor in. A lot of the time, whenever we speak of Somalis, if we are not speaking of them in hyphenated version, Kenyan Somalis, or if we are not speaking about them as people on the margins. Now, a lot of the time I feel than before, I feel that the Somalis are actually part of the mainstream. You go to Luduli Avenue, when I came to this town, Luduli Avenue was largely, Asian with electronic stuff. Now you see Luduli Avenue largely on both sides. You see plenty of Somali business owners. You go to Lavington and you see, what has been the process? How can these be enhanced for the Somalis to begin seeing themselves as the mainstream, beyond the politics of, representation, where it's largely token, the majority speaker is from there, the IBC boss is from there, in terms of actual substantive way where a common man will feel that Somalis are mainstream?
And my name is Anab Mohammed. Point of correction, I'm not Anab Adan, I'm Anab Mohammed from USIU. It's true that Somalis are one of the African people who don't recognize borders at all. I know there's a lot of hardship that was faced by the Somali. Initially, this was brought, especially the Kenyan Somalis, this was brought by the issue of wanting to secede after the colonial era. But that brought a lot of war and problems between the government and the people from northern frontier. But later on, I think this is the best time that we feel we are included in the government and in socio-economic process. This is the best time. There's a lot of laws and acts that are created that is enhancing and bringing inclusivity in the country.
Boniface, I put you last with specific purpose to really rouse up. If I look around, I see a fairly young audience. I want to I want you to speak to the question of, the role of art, the role of music, and specifically within the social media platform, because there are many, Twitter followers, Facebook followers, largely young audience that I follow and curate and learn a great deal of, and some of them are in this house, and you know yourselves. Boniface, can you speak to that group on, the role of, mainstream media, the role of art, the role of music, as far as diversity and inclusion and lack thereof is concerned?
Hello, everyone. So while I was sitting there, I was actually enjoying the music on stage, and I was like, that's very beautiful. And we need to have that on our National Day celebrations. I think what you do, if you want to molest and harass a people, you take away their identity, their culture, their music, their poetry. If you're a dictator and you take over a country, you go and close the theater and ensure they don't read. And I think most Kenyans have never interacted with Somali cultural identity. Somali is the land of poets. But when I think about, there are not so many Somali poets that I know of. I know if you think about hip hop in this country, I think what comes to mind is Kenyan. And if you want to become, the moment you are dehumanized by the state, then they can do anything to you. I grew up in Isili, Jam Street Fries, that was my hood when I was a young boy. I went to Pangani Primary School. And when I was young, I could see every single day Somalis being rounded up and taken to the police station. Every single day. Till to date, it still happens. And we were told they were all illegals, which was not true. And that speaks to the idea that if the 44 other tribes of this country don't interact and understand who Somali are as a people, that they straddle 5 countries, that they have an identity, that they're unique and all other things, when Kasarani happens, when an entire community is rounded up and called terrorists, people will agree to that. But how do you reclaim that space? How you reclaim that space? By telling your stories, by becoming your own storytellers, by standing up and saying these things. When I heard that there's 8 MCAs in Nairobi who are from the Somali ethnic community, I said that's a very good thing, because guys, young Somalis walking around Nairobi city or going for a date to Uhuru Park can stop being harassed because they have a representative. And so what can we do as young people occupying social media is coming up with our own, like the Somali Heritage Week hashtag, coming up with our own hashtag telling our stories. The same way the people of Modamaki or Nazarites are going to have their own hashtag, you need to have your own hashtag telling your stories. And remember this, we're living in a generation of 140 characters. If you can't tell me a story in 140 words, or in one photo, or in an Instagram story, or in this thing, the other thing, Snapchat.
Don't show your age, Bonnie.
Then, let me not betray my age. If you can't tell me a story that get me in that short span of time, I will not identify you. And I want to tell you something about the young Somalis in the audience today. So the Wagala massacre happened in the 80s, and a lot of brutalities that actually happened. What the elders in the Somali community did that has actually helped the country today, they said take the kids to school. That's what they did. That's why you have Duale, Abdullahi, Abdul Nasir, you have Abdikadir, you have all this, Adan Mohammed, you have all these people because they took a deliberate move to take the kids to school and to ensure that they're competing in this place. But when they got there, they're not fighting for us. You understand that? They're not doing that. They're actually fighting for their stomachs. They've betrayed what the elders did. Now, what you guys can be able to do, because my inbox is full every other day, that for a Somali Kenyan to get a passport is a problem. To get an ID, it's a problem. To join campus, it's a problem because you've already been profiled. You need to tell your stories and reclaim your place in the society. Duale won't do it for you. Adan Mohammed won't do it for you. Amina won't do it. You have to do it. Tell your stories. Sing your poetry. Fight for that space. Because power doesn't concede and doesn't just give it easily. That space that they have occupied, you have to fight for it. You have to rewrite the narrative. Most terrorists in this country are not Somalis. They're converts from their Luyas, Kikuyus, Luos who have converted. But if you ask anyone who is Al-Shabaab, they tell you it's a Somali, but it's not. The people fighting Al-Shabaab, the people fighting, I was in Mogadishu, the people who are in Al-Shabaab ranks today are foreign fighters. They're not Somalis, they're foreign fighters. And those are the narratives that you guys have to tell. You have to tell that story and tell it and tell it and tell it. Because if you don't tell your own story, someone is going to tell it and tell it in their own way, and you become a victim. So stop being victims.
Thank you, Boniface. That takes us to my next question to Rashid. There is a tendency, I mean, and it's not limited to Somalis, by the people from northern Kenya to represent themselves as if they are agencyless, as if they are marginalized. Marginalized as they are, we cannot run away from that. I mean, it's been intergenerational. But what I want you to speak about is the role of devolution in trying to address some of these issues and tie that to the question of accountability that Boniface has thrown the gauntlet to the younger people, but also broadly to the Somali communities. I mean, we are hearing that, yes, there has been a devolution, but there has been devolution of also all the ills of the national government. How can that be addressed? Because one of the things that, deny people diversity is inclusivity as well, at the local level, at the micro level where these things are also happening.
I think the first point to remember is that the campaign for a devolved system of government or decentralization was actually led from the periphery. It wasn't actually considered by the center. This was a campaign that was led by people in northern Kenya, people in parts of the Rift Valley, but also the Kenyan coast. This was a peripheral demand, which was later, which the center had to concede. Now, the fact that Kenya is now a devolved system of government, I think, is a major, major step forward. And if you look at it, no other country has undertaken a radical restructuring of the state as Kenya has done. There are very few examples of that kind of radical restructuring of the state. And with that comes definitely a lot of challenge. And we are beginning to see some of the challenges because the devolution was not actually part of a democratization process. It was largely a concession of power, basically granting of power, extra powers to the regions as well as resources. I think there's no doubt that there is a huge, huge civic pride in the fact that we now have a devolved government. We now have a governor whom we can basically elect or remove from office. And so if you go to the counties of Wajir, Mandera, and Garissa, and you talk to ordinary people, you will find that every person you talk to is very happy with the fact that Somalis for the first time have an accountable government. And also, the other point is that you also have huge resources going to these counties. Just to give you an example, Wajir County itself annually receives something like 7 billion Kenya shillings. And that's a huge amount of money. In the last 3 years, more money has been disbursed by the central government to northern counties than in the last 53 years. And that should tell you a lot, combined. So it is massive amount of money which is going to the regions. And this is why young people who are here matter, because this money ought to be used for your interest and for the interest of your grandchildren. If it is not going to the right places, then you need to demand where it is going. And so I want to see young people in northern Kenya actually actively, provide oversight and also demand where this money, because it is actually a constitutional, it is there in the constitution that a budget cannot be passed without the input of the people. I have seen in places like Wajir, young people forming themselves into groups actually demanding accountability. And that, is quite progressive and is something that should continue. I think just from what I'm saying, you clearly know that corruption is a huge problem. Garissa, we know, was badly mismanaged. We have a new county governor. We don't know how he will perform. But I think Garissa was one of the most mismanaged counties in northern Kenya. But devolution doesn't cure all the evils. You still have a security state which actually operates in northern Kenya sometimes without a lot of coordination with the local governments. And we have seen actually that cause a lot of anxieties. It inflames public opinion and also sometimes turns even good-natured people against the state. And so, you know, there are many issues, I think, which the state ought to think about. It isn't just simply devolution will appease or assuage all the historical injustices and you know, problems we had in the past. But I recognize that it is a major, I think, revolutionary step forward, if it works.
Thank you so much, Rashid. I'm sure we'll come back to, there are quite a few issues that we need to unpack in that part that I would want to come back to. Nanjala, I mean, even if there is marginalization, not everybody faces marginalization the same way. Here, I'm speaking about, you know, mothers and women. Even if you speak about, you know, the strong security-centered state that Rashid has mentioned, if it's schools and many others, women experience this completely differently. Would you mind speaking about, you know, the role of women and the kind of troubles that they go through? And of course, I mean, like, I'm trying to steer this direction in the way of solution. I'm not looking for hashtag team solution, but I want us to start thinking, how can it be done better?
Okay. I feel a little bit uncomfortable speaking on behalf of Somali women when there are so many Somali women in the room. And I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that and decenter myself from this conversation. It's not my job to speak on your behalf. What I'm going to be saying is almost a summary of the information that's out there. And it actually has to do with why we started the Somali Heritage Week in the first place. 2015, who remembers the hashtag Justice for Khadija? The woman who was stabbed in the head and the knife and all of that. That's actually one of the reasons why we started the Somali Heritage Week. Because once that happened, we started to look for support for this woman with another activist, Wanjirin Deru, and we were looking for a shelter or something. And we found that most of the women's shelters in Kenya are underfunded, and they do not do any work in the Northeast. So it was a question of how do we get this woman to Nairobi and get help. And then there started a process of research. And according to the National Bureau of Statistics, women in the Northeast, what used to be Northeastern province, have the worst socioeconomic outcomes of women in any region in the country, which is saying a lot because Kenya performs poorly generally. We have the highest rates of domestic violence in Kenya are in the Northeast. The lowest rates of women education are in the Northeast. The lowest rates of access for women healthcare, basic healthcare, highest rates of maternal mortality are in the Northeast. This process of economic and political marginalization of the northern counties hits women particularly hard, and women in pastoralist communities particularly hard, because it's difficult to get basic support for, you know, childbirth, you know, that a woman can deliver. We say children are our future, we love them, we protect them, but giving birth is one of the most dangerous things a woman in Kenya can do, and more so in the Northeast. And so we've seen, again, to take back to devolution, with the creation of these women's representative positions or women member of parliament positions, and that's supposed to bring more women to the table. I'm so proud of Ijara, first elected woman from the Northeast. I'm so happy because, again, that was another statistic, and the only other region that is struggling in the same regard is my own. We also don't have a lot of women running for office in Western Kenya. So just to say that marginalization hits women particularly hard, whereby patriarchy creates an extra obstacle. And to pick up on something Bonnie said about identity cards, some of the most intelligent, driven, passionate people, young people that I've encountered in Kenya in the last 5 years are young Somali ethnic. I worked with NEPKUSA, the Northeastern Province Students Association of Kenyatta University. Brilliant young people. And then we had a great conference, and then in the end they were like, oh, I can't apply for a bank account. I can't get an internship because I can't apply for a bank account because I don't have an ID. And we were literally saying, I want to hire you. I want you to work for me. But I can't pay you unless you have a bank account. Things like that, and especially for young women. Who speaks up for young women? So yeah, just to recap, if you look at the numbers, the demographic surveys done every year, and they break it down into surveys, and if you look out for the numbers in the Northeast, it makes you really sad because of the disproportionate impact that it's having on young women. And again, to say I'm decentering myself, I'm not speaking on your behalf, I'm just recapping what's out there and hopefully putting a challenge out there for Somali men to speak up for Somali women. That doesn't mean take the microphone and speak for them, but to speak for them. And for Somali women, you inspire me so much. I've met so many amazing, amazing Somali women, and let us know what we can do to help bridge that gap that is created by this political structure that we live in. Let us know how we can support each other as women, because again, it's not a Somali problem per se. Kenya generally, we have the highest rates of domestic violence, I think, that measured in East and Southern Africa as a country. So things like that, how can we build communities across ethnic divides and start to speak up for women? I think that's a good place to start.
Thank you, Nyebola. Madam Anna, I want to give you two jobs. One is speak as a lived experience from there, but also in the midst of, being profiled from being a shifter to now a terrorist, but during all this period, the community has shown tremendous amount of resilience. The community has shown tremendous amount of entrepreneurship, something that you hear a lot in the national discourse, but something that the Somalis hardly are given credit for. I interact with this a lot of the time. You are being told, "You ni pesa piracy." It's like piracy initially, even when they want to give you credit, they give it one hand and take it with the other. But yeah, yeah. So I would want you to speak about the lived experience of as a mother, as a woman, but also about this resilience, because I want to open it up for Q&A just to get the conversation going.
Yes, actually, it's very true that Somalis have been marginalized over the years. And on top of that, we are double marginalized. Because coming from a marginalized area, and again, being put as people who are criminals, who cannot be able to do anything, who are backward, who are violent, has really made us, very difficult for us to integrate with the rest of the community. As a person, I'm coming from Rift Valley. I'm a person who really loves inclusivity. I'm a person who can speak different languages. I can speak fluent Kikuyu, I can speak fluent Luo, and I can even speak a bit of Luya. But on the other hand, majority of Kenyans will not recognize Somalis as Kenyans. In fact, it's not only Somalis, but all the Kushites who look the same. They'll say, these are, nyinyi ni watu wa kutoka huko, ulikuja kutoka lini, you are a foreigner, you are Al-Shabaab. And these prejudices and stereotypes has really made us have a lot of hard time. Even us who are mixing with people in the urban areas, it is really, really difficult for us. Anybody who does a problem or who kills anyone, the scapegoat is a Somali. Yeah, and that has painted a bad picture on the Somali community.
With your help, I would want 5 questions directed to, I'll pick 5 questions directed to the moderators. I'll beg you, please, make it very short so that we have a better conversation. And my brother, for 5-3 has to be sisters to ensure that we don't marginalize people. I'll start with Balkesa, I'll start with you, I'll start with you, I'll start with you, and that guy next to you on the next round. I've picked 3. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. Good morning, everyone. My name is Balkesa Abdi, And I have a comment and a question at the same time. First of all, I would like to tell my fellow youth, young women and men in this room, that we are the most blessed community. And at the same time, we are the community that feel like we are left out in many ways. Because, first of all, how are we amongst ourselves? We are enemies amongst ourselves when it comes to the Somali community, because the Somali community itself is an umbrella of other communities amongst it. So the enemy starts there to begin with, because if we are united, I'm more than sure, as Boniface Mwangi said, we can own the country, because we have the capacity, we have the ability, and we have the will to do that. But now our main enemy is ethnic division amongst ourselves. And when I talk about a woman, I'm very passionate about women. When I talk about women, yes, there's that aspect of religion that guides us. I am a very proud Muslim Somali woman, but then again, that doesn't end there. I have the choice, I have the ability, I have the capacity to take this forward as a young Somali woman. Because look at this panel, we have gender balance, we have inclusivity, we have Boniface and Nanjala talking about Somali affairs. Are we not blessed? We are. So it's the role of our Jama Cultural Center and other partners to create such a platform. But then it's our responsibility as Somali community to own the space. So we have the capacity, we have the ability, let's own the space, and let's, many times, yes, fingers are pointed at us, but then we have the positive side. If we focus more on the negative side, honestly speaking, we won't have that time to reclaim our space. Thank you.
What time is it? Hi, everyone. My name is Nduta Sialo. I'm the National Secretary of the Kenya Actors Guild, and I'm together with the Chairman, Chris Kamau, of Kenya Actors Guild. I'm going to stand behind Boniface here and say, first of all, I'm very proud to have friends who are Somali. But on to that is that I'm going to just express something here and say, in the part of when you're told to claim your place, yeah, we've had all these negative stories, and for me it has been null and void, because I know more about the Somali friends that I have and the culture of the people I've grown up with. I was born and brought up in Nairobi, so I know a different story. I don't know tribe, I don't know those other things. I am so interested in culture, those things mean so much to me. But I'm going to say this to the youth. In my guild, I only have one Somali actor, Bilal Mohammed. He's an amazing actor. But where are you? We are here to support you. Now, when you're here, before I leave this place today, I should have you people who are actors, look for us and join the guild. The only place we can help you grow, claim that space that he's talking about, stand for your rights, let you know who you are and how to get your space within the guild, right? Is to become a member of the guild, okay? So that is my cry out to you people. Please join the Kenya Actors Guild. I want to see more actors, more people in theater joining the guild, and we can tell your stories. Thank you.
My name is Gibson Maina. I'm an activist and community organizer working for Power 254. My question is to the intellectuals, the Somali intellectuals. One of you mentioned that there are local groups organizing at the in Northeasterns, and I would like to know what sort of collaboration the intellectuals that Somalis have with the local groups organizing on the ground level. And if there are any collaboration, what sort of engagement you do have with them, and how intense is it? Thank you.
In trying to enhance inclusivity, can you tell me what the effects of architecture and how homes are built in this country, in the sense that there is a security guard, a gate, you walk a little bit, there's another gate, walk a little bit more, you get to the front door, which you were trying to get through in the first place. And what kind of stereotypes and what kind of image does that reinforce when majority of people are actually buying those houses and trying to move to those houses, and saying that you're running from somebody on one hand and saying that you're trying to be inclusive and be open-minded on the other hand. So can you tell me why people are buying, what that says about us rather than the builders? and as a nation as a whole? Thank you.
I'm a PhD student from the University of Chicago. I do social anthropology, but I work in Somaliland. So, well, that was the brief introduction. And then just 2 sentences as prolegomena to the question, and then I'll shoot. I want to take up on the question of the imagination and the question of music and poetry, but also the other 2 suggestions that were made about the inner enemy. That is a global problem because, yes, Kenya has its own inner enemy, but so does the United States, namely the Mexicans. And then if you go further south, for the Mexicans, it's the Guatemalans. And for the Guatemalans, it's the Puerto Ricans, et cetera, et cetera. It goes on and on. So all modern nations think that they have something inside that we need to get rid of. Now, the question that I would like to make is, or the reflection that I would like to invite the panel to participate in is there something inherent in the idea of the nation state that generates this constant fear of the inner enemy, of someone that doesn't belong, by which you construct all the institutions that assemble the state, that keep it alive? And I would like to suggest some answers here. The French Martinican psychiatrist, Frantz Fanon, who wrote The Wretched of the Earth, he was very concerned about this, and his suggestion was the real life of the nation is not in the flags or in the anthems or in the symbols of the state that just make it a plastic object that you can sell either to people or to tourists. No, the real life of the nation is in the ways we do things, in the ways of life, in the life forms. So we talk a lot about state making, state building, peace building, institutions, but we never look at the way we do things. So, and the way we do things is expressed in poetry, in music, because there you see the non-referential capacity of language, you know? So, to sum it up, because I've been a little imbricated here, is the state inherently contradictory to the kind of nation that we want to build? The kind of nation that is not hermetic, that is not territorial, that is not monolingual, which is very well exemplified by the Somalis, you know, which are polyglot, mobile, open. You know, it's I would like to say, an originary cosmopolitanism.
I want to talk about marginalization and devolution. First of all, I want to comment and say that you could not get a richer panel than this that we have today. Very academic, very, very real. Thank you so much for gracing this occasion. Rashid talked about how devolution has helped the northern Kenya. I mean, for example, he said that Wajir has received 7 billion in the last 5 years that he did not receive in the last 53 years. That's amazing, huge. But also the sad thing about it is what we call devolved corruption, if there's something like that, whereby you see now young people not embarrassed about looting within the counties. What do you think? I mean, how can we stop? It's a very hard question. And ask our young people to also advance their counties and not loot their resources. And also, how can we encourage local entrepreneurship, for example, local industries, so that we're not dependent on so much on things coming out of the counties. For example, in Northeastern, we have devolution, but we don't have industries, for example, manufacturing industries, for example. We still are dependent on other counties to support, which is not bad, but how about localizing industries in the future? Thank you very much for giving me this question. Thank you.
I'm a huge fan of Fanon, and I agree with him completely. I think that I'm going to give some thoughts on that academic line. I think that the state making is inherently a violent process, that you have to break what was there before and replace it with something else. And the thing that is usually broken first, in my view, is smaller identities. And I think it's a paranoia of state making that says that difference cannot exist, cannot coexist, which is a complete fallacy. And I think Kenya is a great example of this, because until maybe 10, 15 years ago, Kenya was one of the most religiously integrated countries in, I would say, in the world. That I went to school, I went to a Catholic school, and I studied Islamic religious education, and I could take the IRE exam if I wanted to on exam day, and there was no fear about it. You know, I have an aunt who went to a Hindu school, SSD in just near the big temple, and she studied HRE, Hindu religious education, and took the exam, and it wasn't a big deal. In the last 10, 15 years, things have changed considerably because we've borrowed someone else's fight. We've borrowed someone else's paranoia, another state's paranoia. But I think with the exception, especially with religion, we were proof that difference does not necessarily need to lead to separation, exactly, that we could all coexist. Statehood layered with capitalism, I think, is what really aggravates this idea. And I think the Mediterranean Sea, what's happening there is a great example of this as well, is governments, you know, European governments that are lecturing the rest of the world on human rights are right now saying we'd rather let these young men and women die than face the threat of increasing our population by 1%. I mean, that's just crazy, right? The numbers of people who are crossing the Mediterranean Sea would not actually affect European demographics in a significant way. But why? We have to protect the European state, we have to protect the European capitalist state, and we think that people who look different might not necessarily advance that interest. So to me, yes, I think we have to, it goes back to imagination. Imagine new ways of building togetherness and building unity. And one of my favorite quotes from the last 2 years is, you need to learn how to read across the lines that we have drawn in our lives. Where reading is a broad term, we need to learn how to appreciate Somali culture even if we're not Somali, to appreciate Kikuyu culture even if we're not Kikuyu, to appreciate each other, not because we can monetize our identity, as you were saying, we can sell Maasai bracelets or whatever, but because we exist and because we are human, and every human adds something cool to this, you know, thing that we're trying to build. And I wanted to also respond a little bit to the point about what can we do about entrepreneurship and manufacturing, whatever. The first thing I would say is, please protect Garissa University. Please protect Garissa University. Please protect Garissa University. I cannot say this enough. The university is the site where most people get their political, social, economic, whatever awakening. That space that has been granted, that has been created, not granted because it's your space, that has been created in Garissa can be the focal point for innovation, for creativity, for imagination, for a new way of telling stories from the Northeast that is not dependent on interpretation from Nairobi. Please protect Garissa University. I cannot say it enough. Give public lectures there. Go and take back knowledge and training and all of that stuff. It is such an amazing space. Please defend it. And the second thing I would say is, this plastics ban is such a good opportunity for the Northeast. This is a tangent, because Somali weaving, the baskets that Somali women are making, can you all please cash in on that and start selling us Somali baskets? Because they're amazing, and I'm just saying, that's like a complete tangent, monetizing culture, but there's like a space there, and, you know, take it, why not, you know? Anyway.
Thank you so much, Nanjala. I think that's the most eloquent. We should all shut up and go home, I think. Brilliant. I couldn't agree more. If I can answer a question that was put here about division within the Somali society. I think this is something which today is a cultural day, is a day when we, I think, celebrate the fact that we are beautiful people, we have great food, we have great music. But also I think, in all honesty, we ought to acknowledge that also we suffer from the same, I think, you know, problems that also, you know, bedevil other societies. We also have schisms within our you know, our community. We also have A lot of the rubbish beliefs about nobility and about inferior people, and these things, I think, cause tremendous problems within our society. And I agree with that unless we also not just seek inclusion and integration, but also foster that within ourselves, we cannot reach anywhere. I think it is a bit, ill-advised for us to concentrate so much on building bridges with other communities when we also, deny minorities within our society, within our community, rights. Just to give you an example, if you were to go to northeastern Kenya today, you will find minority clans are not properly represented in the county assembly. And they complain all the time about how marginalized they are. Go across to Somalia, it's a perennial problem. It is also a source of major friction and sometimes conflict. So we can, of course, continue to demand integration and to be taken seriously and to be part of the mainstream. But also, I think we should also do that. Unless we foster justice and inclusion within our own tent, we cannot expect that from other communities as well. The issue of corruption, I think, is quite real, and it's what I think worries me deeply about northern Kenya. First of all, because I don't think you have a very educated bureaucracy. So you don't have actually even means of keeping track of how money is spent. You also do not have, I think, that culture of probity, because in the past, money was actually handed out by the DCs and the PCs. There was no process actually of disbursing money from the center. Everything was done through the provincial administration. And we know, provincial administration was part of the crisis in Kenya for many years. And it was actually the way in which the provincial administration operated in the marginalized counties was actually radically different from the way it operated elsewhere. It was much more predatory. It was much more arrogant, the way it operated in northern Kenya. And I fear that, if you do not have a very vigilant civil society, if you do not have a very vigilant people who actually, also mobilize, you will have trouble. I was impressed when I went to Wajir. I did a bit of field work on the devolution there, and I was impressed by the fact that you had roads being tarmacked, you had lights being solar lights being erected. So I wanted, and I had complaints from, they have a very noisy civil society in Wajir, which is a very healthy thing. So the young girl came up to me and said, we have devised a system in which we can alert the governor to any misappropriation of money privately to him. And I thought that was a brilliant idea. And this was an initiative that was by young people in Wajir. If they see financial malpractice, they alert the governor immediately. Of course, that assumes that the governor then will take action. But just to tell you that there is a huge, I think, ferment, that people are not just victims. They are trying to do something about their condition.
And thank you so much, Rashid. You've really touched a lot on corruption. I'd also like to add on that. First and foremost, we have a very good system that is also, I'm really optimistic about devolution, and I think it can reduce the marginalization that has been there in our country. However, the system that has been put in place is not complete. We don't have complete structures that can enhance accountability and public participation at the county level. Therefore, we have devolved corruption. But having said that, corruption starts with me and you. So for us to be able to stop corruption, it starts with me and you, and we have to make this our leaders accountable. We should not agree that at any one time that we choose our leaders basis on being given some tokens. So we have to make our leaders accountable. On the other hand, I'd like to urge the activists like Mwangi, thank you so much for the good work you've been doing, but I'd like to tell the civil society to try and train people, because most of the people at the county level are not educated as such. They don't know how they can be able to put, they can make the county government accountable. Therefore, I'd urge you can kindly come up with strategies where you can be able to educate people at the grassroots level so that they can be able to have a space for political participation and they can put these leaders accountable.
I'll start with the fear part and the fences. I think this is why you have very high walls and barbed wire and dogs and armed security is a reflection of Kenya, that we don't have enough to go around and people fear because of insecurity. When I was growing up, the guys who grew up in Nairobi in the 80s and 90s, we didn't have those fences. We used to jump fences to go and you used to have a lot of trees with fruits, lugwards, apples, and mapera, and used to go and actually go and get fruits from people's houses because there were not such big fences. But I think as the country has become very, very poor, as the population grows and the looting continues, people have become very poorer. So that's why you have those big fences. And I think there's also the betrayal of the middle class. Instead of them fighting for everybody's security, they get personal security. So when you're looking for a house, you need to have a gated community and dogs and alarm system. Instead of fighting for everyone to be safe in this country, we've said to give members of parliament, personal security, bodyguards, and CS, and other people. So we don't think collectively as a nation. I don't think even Kenya is a nation. Timothy Njoya described Kenya as a market. It's a marketplace. Kenya was formed by what was the name of that? British East Africa Company. That was actually the original name of Kenya. It has never been a nation yet. It's still a marketplace where services are sold to the highest bidder. If it's health, nurses have been on strike for over 100 days. So if you're sick, you go to a private hospital. So if you can afford it, you can get it. And so because Kenya is insecure, if you can afford a gated community, then you go and live there to be safe. But for you to get to your house, you have to pass through very unsafe roads. So for us to move from that high walls, we need to make the nation called country Kenya work, where everyone is assured of their security by the state. Coming back to, I'm going to go back and forth, to talking about entrepreneurship and people starting manufacturing business in northern Kenya. I think we need first to get the basics right. Do you have water? Do you have electricity? Do you have enough schools to educate the people going to work in those schools, to go and work in those companies? We know, to date, Mandera has a problem with teachers. After the attack where they kill people, we don't have qualified teachers going to Mandera, no one to go to Mandera. So can we assure first we need to have an educated class to actually run Northeastern? He said very well that you don't have people who can actually ensure there is accountability because of education levels. So we need to think 20, 30 years from now, what do we need Northeastern to become? Then we start educating for the future. And I think the biggest betrayal of the Somali community is the intellectuals. They have sold out. And I'm going to call us small out because you're there as well. Because you have a very vocal voice online. And you have decided to align your voice with whoever you want to. But remember, the moment you align, you can't call out those guys and they don't give your people IDs. Remember that. So you have to realize that you have a very critical voice. Don't sell out that voice. I think we need to suffer for the short term to gain for the long term. So the reason why we have fear and division in this country, we don't have enough. As long as there is want and there is poverty, there will always be division and fear, because we think Somalis are stealing our land because they're buying land. But they forget those Somalis are Kenyans. Remember that. So you have no problem with Kamau Joroge buying land, but you have a problem with Aden or Fatma or Rehema buying land. And that is how this country has been ruled by the elite. They collect our taxes and they blame someone else. Kenya is not insecure because of Al-Shabaab. We're insecure because when Somalia is selling sugar and not securing our border, the sugar that is used by middle class Kenyans every day comes from Kismayo. You know that very well. Mumias is not producing enough sugar. Illegal. So the whole idea of Kenya to work for everyone is that you guys, you fight your part and ensure there's accountability Northeastern. Ensure that guys are getting IDs, they're going to school. My part, ensure that Kikuyus are not brainwashed with this Mudhamaki nonsense that Uhuru is a king. Kikuyus never had a king. That is my role. Her role in Western Kenya is to ensure that there are more women running for elective office. So collectively, we have a role to play. And I cannot come to Northeastern to educate activists or work in the grassroots without invitation. I'll be killed. Not because I'm a bad person, because I'm unwelcome. So for me to go to Wajir or Mandera, wherever it is, to come and work with the local people, you have to invite me and open the door for you. I was in Mogadishu last month, and I loved it. I wanted to stay there for long, but I couldn't get someone to host me, so I'd love to go back there. So if you tell me you want me to go to Mandera, Garissa, Wajir, Marsabit, and go and work there and train people, I will come as long as you invite me. But remember, the fight doesn't belong to me. It belongs to the locals. The locals must fight for their space and fight for accountability and reclaim their space. Because as long as there's a vacuum, Dwele becomes your spokesman and you become a national shame.
I want to be the most unpopular person here and say that we'll end it there on such a local and passionate note. The panelists are here. I'm sure we'll interact with them, ask more questions. I wanted it to be short and simple and sweet so that you can have more time to interact with the panel. Thank you so much, all of you, for participating. And to my panelists, as always, thank you so much. It's not very easy to have a panel in Kenya that runs on time. People just speak sentences without really being pulled in our amazing, Jubilee and NASA. And we've really avoided that, and that we really owe it to ourselves. Thank you so much to the organizing committee. This is my 3rd edition, and I'm happy to be part of it. I can see some people have already retired who are organizers, and that shows that transition can be done. Over to you, Mr. MD.
Asante sana. Please, a huge round of applause to the fantastic, well-informed panelists. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Boniface. Thank you very much. Well done. We really love you. Anab, shukran. Shukran so much. Nanjala, asante sana. Yeah. And Rashid, thank you very much. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming.